My name is Claire Whitmore, and if you asked anyone in my life, they'd say I'm quiet, careful, the type of person who blends into the background. I've never been the favorite, never been the one people called first, the one everyone turned to for advice or money or secrets. That was my sister, Vanessa. She had a way of walking into a room and bending the air to her will. She always got what she wanted, always. And for most of my life, I had accepted it, quietly, without protest. Until the phone rang that morning. It was 6:12 a.m., the kind of early hour when the world feels empty and fragile. I almost didn't answer. But something curiosity, a premonition, made me pick up. Claire. Vanessa's voice was unnervingly calm. Yes? I said, trying to sound as casual as I could. There was a pause. Then she said it, her words clipped, precise, like she had practiced them 1,000 times. Mom's dead. The estate, it's mine. I froze for a heartbeat, my mind trying to process. My mother dead. My chest tightened. But strangely, it wasn't grief that I felt first. It was something else. Something that had been simmering quietly in me for years. Then Vanessa laughed soft, cruel, victorious. Don't bother coming back, Claire. There's nothing left for you here. Mom made her choice. And that's when I smiled. It wasn't a wild, happy smile. It wasn't one of victory. It was calm, measured. The kind of smile that hides storms. Vanessa thought she had just won. She thought the story ended with Mom's passing and her clever little will. But she didn't know me. She didn't know what Mom had trusted me with. And most importantly, she didn't know that smiles can be dangerous. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence stretch. Vanessa didn't realize it, but silence is powerful. It makes people uncomfortable. They feel like it's waiting for them to slip to say something they shouldn't. Claire? Hello? Vanessa's voice broke the quiet. Whom, I said softly. Congratulations. There was another pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. Was I crying? Was I panicking? I could almost hear her relief that I sounded nothing, that I was no threat. That was her first mistake. After I hung up, I didn't call anyone. I didn't drive anywhere. I didn't scream or slump into my bed. I sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring at the morning sun spilling across the hardwood floor. And I thought about my mother, about the quiet lessons she had taught me over the years, lessons Vanessa had ignored because she was too busy chasing favors, attention, and control. My mother had always been clever, and she had been careful. Vanessa never realized that Mom had left more than property behind. She had left proof, evidence, safeguards, and she had entrusted me with them, the daughter she knew could endure, the one she knew could wait, watch, and act when the time was right. For years, Vanessa had walked through life thinking she was untouchable. That charm, aggression, and entitlement were all it took to win. She had never understood subtlety, patience, or the quiet accumulation of truth. She thought she could manipulate Mom, manipulate the will, manipulate the future. But she had underestimated me. I leaned forward and picked up my mother's journal from the shelf. It was the one Vanessa had never touched. Inside, in Mom's careful handwriting, were notes, reminders, even warnings. Instructions for me in case something ever happened. A roadmap of how to protect what was ours and expose what was not. I smiled again, not because Vanessa had lost. Not yet. But because I knew the truth. And truth has a way of moving slowly, quietly, and lethally. Vanessa called again later that morning, each time more impatient, more annoyed that I wasn't reacting. I didn't answer. I let her wear herself out. She thought control was in her hands. She thought victory was hers. She was wrong. Because in that quiet moment, sitting alone with the sun creeping across the kitchen floor, I realized something that would define the next few weeks, months, maybe even years. Revenge is a slow game, and the best kind isn't about anger. It isn't about yelling or forcing someone to pay. It's about precision, observation, patience, and when the time comes, execution. Vanessa had taken everything she thought she could. But what she didn't know, what she could never know, was that I had been ready for this my entire life. And the story, as far as she knew, had just begun. I've never told many people this, but growing up with Vanessa was like living in a house that had one sun and one shadow, and the shadow was me. Vanessa was the sun. Bright, warm, blinding, everyone drawn to her. Teachers loved her, neighbors doted on her, Mom practically adored her. And I learned to become invisible. Invisible but not powerless. Mom always said there's a difference between being quiet and being weak. Vanessa never understood that. She thought manipulation, charm, and noise could get her anything. And for a long time she was right. She got the best schools, the bigger allowance, the vacations, even Mom's laughter more than mine. I watched it all silently, storing everything in the part of my brain Vanessa would never reach. I learned to observe, to remember details, to notice patterns others ignored. The way Vanessa's voice changed when she lied, how Mom's eyes sometimes flickered with doubt, the way small, carefully hidden documents could protect someone if the time ever came. Vanessa, on the other hand, learned only to take She never saw the consequences. She never understood patience. She never understood subtlety. There was one night I will never forget. Mom called me into the study when Vanessa was out with friends. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own heartbeat sound like a drum. Mom closed the door and looked at me, eyes glistening. "Claire," she said softly, "I need you to promise me something." I nodded. "Promise me that if anything ever happens, if Vanessa tries to take what's not hers, you'll protect the truth." I remember nodding again, though my stomach twisted in fear and anticipation. She handed me a folder. Legal documents, financial statements, letters, even recordings. She had prepared for betrayal. Not just from strangers, not just from opportunists, but from her own child. My sister. That night I realized two things. Vanessa would always take what she wanted, and I would always be ready to stop her. Years passed. Vanessa came home after college with her usual confidence, thinking she had already won life itself. Mom was getting older, and she started leaning on Vanessa in ways that Vanessa didn't realize were traps. Mom trusted Vanessa to handle the estate, to make decisions, but she also trusted me to watch, to remember, to record, to wait. Vanessa never suspected that quiet Claire, the one who said nothing, did nothing, was actually the one holding all the cards. I watched as she signed checks, sold furniture, redirected accounts. I watched her charm friends and relatives, all while believing I was powerless. And all the while, I smiled in private, because I knew the moment would come when her arrogance would collide with reality. You see, revenge isn't about rage, it's about timing. And Vanessa had spent a lifetime showing me exactly how predictable she was. Every move she made, every step she took, left a trail. Every brag, every lie, every attempt to isolate Mom left evidence. She didn't even realize she was digging her own trap. The hardest part, though, was pretending to be the sibling she could dismiss. I had to endure years of being overlooked, belittled, and underestimated. Every time she gloated about being Mom's favorite, every time she assumed I was weak, I stored it. Every slight became a note in the ledger of truth I would one day reveal. And that day, well, it was closer than she imagined. I think the part of revenge people don't understand is that it isn't satisfying in the moment. It's satisfying in the slow burn, in the way someone's own arrogance becomes their downfall. Watching Vanessa think she had one, while I quietly waited with everything I needed, that feeling was intoxicating. That morning when she called, claiming the estate, I remembered every injustice, every slight, every smile she had given herself thinking she was untouchable. And I smiled back. Not because I was happy, not because I was cruel, but because I was ready. Vanessa had never learned that being underestimated can be a weapon, and I had been sharpening mine for years. That's the thing about families like ours. Love is complicated. Trust is fragile. And revenge. Revenge is inevitable when someone believes the story is over before it even begins. And for Vanessa, the story hadn't even started yet. The day Vanessa filed the will, I felt a strange mixture of amusement and fury. I had expected this. I had expected her arrogance, her assumptions, her eagerness to declare victory before even checking the locks on reality. And yet, seeing her smug face in the courtroom photos made my blood boil. Vanessa strutted around like a queen, claiming her crown. She had the notarized documents, 2 witnesses, and a lawyer who seemed more terrified of her than of the law. On paper, it looked perfect, impeccable, untouchable. But paper, like people, can lie. Vanessa didn't know, of course, that Mom had prepared for every possibility. Years before, when Mom's hair had started turning silver and her hands had begun to tremble slightly while signing checks, she had secretly updated an older Willa contingency plan, carefully drafted, sealed, and placed in an attorney's vault under my name. It included every asset, every account, and safeguards to protect it against coercion. Mom had even written notes warning me to watch Vanessa's patterns carefully. I smiled as I walked into the courthouse that morning, not at her. Not at the will, but at the sheer predictability of her actions. Vanessa had already started liquidating assets. The family car had been sold without telling me. Jewelry, paintings, even the antique clock from the living room. She had changed the locks to the house. She had called the bank and frozen Mom's accounts, making herself the sole point of access. And she thought she was untouchable. I didn't panic. I didn't call her out. I let her believe that I was powerless, that I was the quiet sister who would never act. That was her biggest mistake. Because while Vanessa thought she controlled everything, I had quietly filed a motion for a forensic review of the will. Nothing flashy, nothing public, just a small legal maneuver designed to make the perfect will hers temporarily moot until every document could be verified. And that was when the cracks began to show. Medical records, long ignored, revealed that Mom had been on medication during the week. The notarized will was signed. Witness statements were inconsistent and remembered meetings differently. Some had suddenly developed selective amnesia. Small, seemingly insignificant details, like timestamps and delivery receipts, were starting to contradict the official story. I could almost hear Vanessa screaming in her head, though she was still laughing to everyone else. She had never learned to notice the small things, the tiny threads that, when pulled, could unravel an entire empire. I watched her make mistake after mistake, each one adding fuel to the fire I had been quietly building. She bragged to her friends, to relatives, even to the probate clerk. "The estate is mine. Claire doesn't even know what she's missing." She didn't realize that knowing less is not always a disadvantage. Sometimes it's a trap for the one who knows too much. By the time the first hearings began, Vanessa was already exhausted. Every email she had sent bragging about her control was scrutinized. Every rushed signature and ignored document became evidence against her. And through it all, I remained calm, watching, recording, waiting. I remembered Mom's words. "Patience is the deadliest weapon, Claire. Wait for the moment when they believe victory is theirs. Then, act." And now, that moment was approaching. Vanessa had underestimated one thing: the quiet sister who had been watching, noting, and documenting for years. I wasn't angry. I wasn't impulsive. I was ready. Every misstep, every arrogance-fueled action Vanessa had taken was a part of her undoing. And while she was busy celebrating a victory that didn't exist yet, I had already laid the groundwork to take back everything that was rightfully ours, as Mom had intended. That day, I left the courthouse with a folder in my hand, a folder Vanessa didn't know existed. It contained motions, medical evidence, and notes I had quietly compiled over the years. She thought she had one. She thought she was untouchable. She thought I was the powerless one. And I smiled again. Not because I had started to win. Not yet. But because the truth, carefully built over years of silence, was about to strike. And when it did, Vanessa would realize that the estate was never hers. To claim that her victory had been nothing more than an illusion, Vanessa had been living in a bubble, and that bubble was about to burst. I watched her from a distance, letting her believe she was in control. She had no idea that every move she made, every boast, every careless signature, was being quietly catalogued, every misstep, feeding the fire I had been building for years. I received the first notice of the forensic review the morning after Vanessa had filed the will. It wasn't dramatic. There were no flashing lights, no immediate courtroom confrontation, just a quiet letter in the mail. But that letter, that little slip of paper, changed everything. Suddenly, the perfect will she had so proudly submitted was under scrutiny. I smiled quietly as I read it. The next day I called her. I could hear the confidence in her voice, the assumption that I was still powerless, still silent. "Claire, come on," she said. "Don't make this messy. Just accept it. Mom's gone. The estate is mine." I laughed softly. "Messy? Oh, Vanessa, it's already messy. You just don't know it yet." Her silence on the other end was telling. For a moment, I imagined the gears turning in her mind, the unease growing, but she quickly covered it with her usual arrogance. The first court date arrived, and I remember walking into the building with a calmness that unnerved even my lawyer. Vanessa was there too, looking triumphant. She had her best suit, her sharp smile, and the kind of confidence only someone who has never faced consequences can possess. Then the review began, and that's when the cracks appeared. First, the medical records. The will had been signed while Mom was taking medications that affected her judgment. Next, the witnesses. One of them admitted they were pressured into signing, and another, well, their memory didn't match the official story at all. The notary, once confident, became hesitant under questioning. And the bank. They started flagging transactions Vanessa had made, calling for explanations she couldn't provide. Vanessa's face, once so composed, began to show cracks, a flicker of panic, a tightness in her jaw. And through it all, I sat quietly, my hands folded, my smile subtle but real. Not smug, not gloating, just calm, patient, knowing. During recess, Vanessa stormed into the hallway and I heard her muttering under her breath. "She's playing me. She's actually playing me." Yes, Vanessa, that's exactly what I was doing. The most satisfying part, watching her make mistakes she thought she couldn't make. In her haste to maintain appearances, she called friends to help fix the situation, leaving a trail of emails, voicemails, and messages that became evidence against her. Every frantic attempt to cover her tracks only made the case stronger. I remembered Mom's words again, whispered to me in the quiet study years ago. "Claire, patience is the deadliest weapon. Wait until they believe they've won, then act." Vanessa thought she had already acted. She thought she had won. She thought I was powerless. But power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it smiles. By the end of the day, the court had paused all estate activities. Assets were frozen. Transactions were reviewed, and the perfect will was being questioned at every turn. Vanessa sat at the back, fuming, red-faced, realizing for the first time that control was slipping from her fingers. She called me that night. I could hear her voice shaking, though she tried to cover it. "Claire, what are you doing?" "You can't." I cut her off gently. almost kindly. "I'm not doing anything, Vanessa. You did this to yourself." Her silence lasted longer than I expected. I could imagine her pacing, panicking, realizing that the estate she had claimed so confidently was no longer hers to manipulate. And through it all, I stayed calm. Because calm is louder than anger. Calm is more terrifying than shouting. Calm tells someone that you know exactly what you're doing, and that you've been preparing for this moment far longer than they ever imagined. I went to bed that night with a quiet satisfaction, knowing the next moves would come in due time. Vanessa had made her mistakes. She had revealed herself. She had shown the world and the court who she really was. And now, the slow, deliberate unraveling had begun. I had never seen Vanessa so unprepared in her life. For years, she had prided herself on her ability to charm, to manipulate, to control. She had assumed that in court, her confidence and bravado would be enough. But she hadn't counted on two things. 1, the meticulous records Mom had left me, and 2, my patience. The courtroom was packed that morning. Lawyers, family, friends, a few nosy neighbors, everyone curious about the sudden unraveling of what they had thought was a straightforward will dispute. Vanessa walked in with her usual sharp stride, perfectly coiffed, perfectly smug. She even gave me a sideways glance, the kind that said, "Claire, you're too late. You'll never touch this." She was wrong. The judge called the hearing to order, and I watched as my lawyer calmly laid out our first piece of evidence, the medical records proving Mom had been under heavy sedation during the signing of the new will. Vanessa's face fell. Her lawyer opened his mouth to argue, but even he seemed uneasy, as if he hadn't anticipated the clarity of the documents we had. Then came the emails. Hundreds of them, carefully compiled over years. Messages where Vanessa had pressured Mom to sign documents, threatening subtle consequences if she refused. Threats disguised as concern. Bribes disguised as love. Each one revealed the pattern I had observed for years. The manipulation, the control, the deceit. Vanessa tried to interrupt, tried to charm the witnesses, but her usual tactics fell flat. The witnesses didn't cower. They told the truth. Slowly, methodically, the picture began to form. This wasn't just a dispute over a will. This was exploitation, abuse, a calculated attempt to take advantage of someone who had trusted her implicitly. I remember the moment when Vanessa realized the magnitude of her mistake. It wasn't when the judge frowned at her. It wasn't when her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. It was when a neighbor, someone she had always thought was loyal, testified against her. Someone she had invited to tea and trusted with family secrets had now publicly confirmed the coercion. The color drained from her face. Her jaw tightened. Her usual poise crumbled like sand slipping through fingers. For the first time, she was exposed, vulnerable, and completely powerless. I stayed calm. I didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I simply observed, letting the evidence do its work. Watching Vanessa unravel in real time was far more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could have been. Then came the most devastating blow: the recordings. Mom's voice, clear and steady, filled the courtroom through the speakers. "If you're hearing this, it means Vanessa thought she had one," Mom said softly but firmly. "But she has forgotten that truth has a memory and justice is patient. Claire, protect what is right. Do not let lies prevail." I felt a shiver run through me, but it was controlled. Vanessa, on the other hand, looked like she might collapse. Her hands shook as she gripped the bench. Her eyes darted around, desperate for some way to regain control. Some loophole, some excuse. There was none. Emails, recordings, medical records, witness testimonies, they all converged like a hurricane, tearing apart the carefully constructed narrative Vanessa had spent years building. Her arrogance had blinded her to the most dangerous thing in the world, the quiet sister who had been watching all along. I smiled then, the kind of calm, almost imperceptible smile that speaks louder than words. Not because I was happy revenge isn't happiness, but because the foundation of truth, laid patiently over years, was finally showing its strength. By the end of the hearing, the judge had ordered a temporary freeze on all assets and scheduled a full investigation. Vanessa slumped into her chair, defeated in a way she had never imagined. No one was mocking her. No one was laughing. She had done this to herself, and now, finally, she could see it. I left the courtroom quietly, my heart steady. I didn't need anyone to know what I had done. The victory wasn't mine to boast about. The satisfaction was in the truth, and the truth was finally taking its rightful place. And Vanessa, she had only just begun to realize the consequences of a lifetime of greed and arrogance. Vanessa had always thrived on control. Every move she made, every word she spoke, every charm-laden smile was designed to bend the world to her will. But that day, in the middle of the courthouse, her empire crumbled. And I, the quiet sister, the one she always underestimated, watched it happen with a calm she could never understand. By mid-morning, the court had made a startling announcement. All assets were frozen pending further investigation, and every transaction Vanessa had made since filing the fraudulent will would be audited. The look on her face was priceless shock, panic, and disbelief blending into something almost animalistic. The woman who had once strutted through life as if the world belonged to her now sat slumped in a chair, trembling, powerless. I stayed quiet as always. There was no need to gloat. Vanessa had built her own trap and I simply let her step into it. One by one, the evidence piled on. Emails, voicemails, and texts where she had pressured Mom into signing documents were read aloud. Witnesses testified about how she had isolated our mother, how she had subtly manipulated decisions over the years, and how she had lied to family members about her intentions. Each revelation chipped away at the false narrative Vanessa had constructed. Her lawyer tried to interject, tried to salvage the situation, but the court was relentless. Even the judge's voice carried a subtle disbelief, as if acknowledging the sheer audacity of Vanessa's actions. The will she had once believed was untouchable now looked like a house of cards, and every card was falling. And then came the final blow: the recordings. Mom's voice, calm but firm, echoed through the courtroom once again. Vanessa thought she had won, but she had forgotten that truth has a memory and justice is patient. Vanessa's face turned pale. Her eyes widened, searching for some escape that did not exist. I noticed her hands trembling as she gripped the bench. For the first time, she was truly afraid. It was a strange moment watching someone so confident and arrogant completely unravel. There was no yelling, no dramatic collapse, just the subtle but undeniable shift from control to defeat. I could see it in every twitch of her face, every nervous glance, every hurried whisper to her lawyer. The more she tried to regain control, the faster it slipped away. And I realized then what I had always known. Revenge isn't about anger. It isn't about shouting or forcing someone to pay. Revenge is a quiet, deliberate thing, built over years, executed with precision. And now it was complete. Vanessa had underestimated me at every turn. She had assumed I was weak, passive, incapable of action. She had never considered the possibility that I had been watching, recording, waiting. Every bribe she offered, every manipulation she attempted, every boastful call she made, all of it had been noted, cataloged, and preserved. And now, it was her undoing. By the end of the hearing, the judge had ordered a full criminal investigation into Vanessa's actions. The estate remained frozen. Assets were being recovered. Her social circle began to distance themselves quietly, wary of being implicated. And in the back of the courtroom, I sat quietly, my calmness a stark contrast to the storm of panic surrounding her. I didn't need to say a word. I didn't need to celebrate. The truth had spoken for itself. Vanessa had built her own prison, and I had simply provided the key. As I left the courthouse, I thought about Mom. I thought about the quiet nights in the study, the whispered lessons about patience, preparation, and observation. Mom had trusted me with the truth, and now I was honoring her in the only way that mattered, by letting justice unfold, silently but powerfully. Vanessa was no longer in control. Her arrogance had been her undoing. And as for me, I had learned something essential. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's quiet. And sometimes it's deadly. That day I realized that revenge isn't about satisfaction or anger. It's about restoration. Restoring truth, restoring balance, and allowing the world to see reality for what it truly is. And Vanessa, she had finally learned the hard way that control is only an illusion when it's built on lies. I still remember the day the court finalized everything. The sun had barely risen and I was sitting quietly in the empty kitchen, a cup of coffee in hand waiting for the call. Vanessa's world had already started to collapse, but this was the final confirmation, the moment when the truth would solidify and justice would be irreversible. The phone rang. I answered without looking at the screen. Claire. Vanessa's voice was trembling. For once she wasn't sharp, wasn't controlling, wasn't full of bravado. She sounded small. Defeated, double quotes. Yes, Vanessa, I said softly. The estate, it's yours. I didn't gloat. I didn't shout or rub her nose in it. I simply smiled and took a slow sip of coffee. Yes, I said, exactly as Mom intended. Vanessa went silent, her breath hitching on the other end. I could hear her trying to find words, but they wouldn't come. That's when I realized something crucial. Revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about letting them face the consequences of their own actions. Vanessa had spent years manipulating, lying, and isolating our mother. She had assumed she was untouchable. The court had merely shown her the truth. The estate had been placed into a trust, just as Mom had meticulously planned years ago. All assets, all accounts, all properties. Vanessa would no longer have access. The antique jewelry, the family home, the car she had already sold, everything, either recovered or safeguarded. I didn't call anyone to celebrate. I didn't post about it or flaunt it. I knew that the quiet satisfaction of restoring what was lost was far more rewarding than any outward display. The court had done its job, but so had Mom, and so had I. Vanessa faced legal consequences as well. The investigation revealed enough irregularities for her to face fines and potential criminal charges. No arrests had been made yet, but the consequences were looming. Her reputation shattered, her credibility destroyed, and her friends distancing themselves quietly, unwilling to be associated with someone who had blatantly manipulated family for personal gain. I walked past her house that evening. I could see her pacing through the window, her figure small and hunched, like the giant she had always pretended to be had shrunk into shadows. I didn't feel triumph over her suffering. I felt relief. Relief that the truth had been restored, that Mom's legacy wasn't stolen, that justice, subtle but powerful, had been delivered. That night I sat alone, thinking about Mom and the lessons she had given me without ever saying them directly. She had trusted me not just to inherit the estate, but to protect the principles she held dear. Patience, observation, strategic action, these were her final gifts. I had honored them. I didn't need Vanessa to beg for forgiveness. I didn't need apologies. The satisfaction of watching truth prevail quietly, of seeing arrogance crumble without my hand raised in anger, was more powerful than anything I could have imagined. I went to bed that night with a calmness that surprised even me. The estate was safe. Vanessa had learned her lesson in a way that would linger for the rest of her life, and I finally understood a secret I had known since that first call. The kind of power that matters isn't flashy or loud. It's careful, calculated, and patient. It's the kind of power that waits silently, smiles, and then executes perfectly. Revenge had been served, but not with cruelty, not with shouts or drama. It had been served with precision, with law, with truth, and, most importantly, with patience. And in that moment, I realized that was far more satisfying than any victory ever could be. Vanessa would never forget this. She had believed she was untouchable. She had believed she could manipulate the family, twist the law, and control reality itself. And yet, in the end, it was her own arrogance that destroyed her and me. I walked away calm and steady, the quiet victor in a story she thought she had written. The estate was ours. The truth had prevailed, and I finally felt, for the first time in years, completely at peace. I never expected revenge to feel quiet, not the way movies show it with shouting, confrontations, or dramatic exits. Instead, it was subtle, controlled, patient, and that made it all the more powerful. Vanessa had lost everything. She thought she owned, not because I had taken it from her, but because she had built her life on lies. The estate, the accounts, the possessions, the prestige of it belonged to truth, and she had ignored it. She had manipulated Mom, flaunted her victory, and assumed no one would ever question her. But truth doesn't rush. It waits. And when it moves decisively. I sat in the quiet of my childhood bedroom, the one Mom had once told me to always keep as my sanctuary. I traced my fingers over the desk where I had taken notes for months, reviewing emails, recordings, and documents Mom had trusted me with. It was all there. Every slight, every manipulation, every lie Vanessa had tried to weave into reality had been captured, preserved, and finally revealed. And yet, I didn't feel triumph, not in the way people expect. I didn't want to gloat. That wasn't what Mom had taught me. True victory, I realized, isn't about crushing someone else. It's about restoring balance, about honoring the truth, about protecting what matters. And now, I could finally breathe, knowing the estate and Mom's legacy was safe. Vanessa, on the other hand, was a different story. She had lost more than money. She had lost credibility, her social circle, and the illusion of invincibility she had worn like armor. Friends who had once laughed at my quietness now whispered about her fall from grace. Family members who had feared her began to speak quietly to me, acknowledging that the quiet one had been the one who saw it all, and she had no idea that her own arrogance had paved the path to her downfall. I walked past her house one evening, as I had many times before, and saw her pacing in the living room, her silhouette small and hunched, a shadow of the woman who had once been so powerful. I didn't call. I didn't watch for long. I just smiled quietly to myself. The lesson had been delivered. The message was clear. Truth always prevails, even when it waits silently. I thought about Mom again, the strength in her eyes, the patience in her voice, the wisdom in her instructions. She had entrusted me not only with her estate, but with the responsibility to carry justice forward, and I had done it exactly as she intended. With outrage, without spectacle, without malice. That was the deadliest part of it all. Vanessa had assumed she could manipulate, charm, and intimidate her way to power, never imagining that quiet observation and careful patience could be far more lethal. She had believed victory was hers the moment Mom died. She had believed I was powerless, passive, and weak. And in believing that, she had walked straight into her own undoing. In the end, what truly died was not just Vanessa's control, not just her illusion of superiority. What died was the lie that arrogance and manipulation could go unpunished. The lie that deceit and greed were stronger than truth and patience, and in that death I found a strange peace, a sense of closure I had never expected to feel. I didn't need anyone to know what had happened, and I didn't need to celebrate. The estate was intact, Mom's legacy preserved, and Vanessa's fall was complete. Justice had been served, quietly, meticulously, and finally. And sometimes the quietest victories are the deadliest. I closed my eyes and let the silence settle around me, the weight of years of observation and patience finally lifting. I had done what was necessary, what Mom had trusted me to do, and in doing so, I had restored more than just property. I had restored truth balance, and the lessons that Vanessa had tried and failed to ignore, and in that quiet, in that subtle smile, I realized something important. Revenge isn't about the pain you inflict on someone else. True revenge, the kind that lingers, is about letting reality do the work. It's about letting truth be deadly, inevitable, and irreversible. Vanessa thought she had won that morning when she called me. She was wrong. And that, more than anything, was the deadliest truth of all.